Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Can you guys read my slides okay back there? In the farther back? Yeah? Okay, cool. I can't really see them. So just to start off, I want to find out, has anybody here built a mobile application before? Holy shit. Okay. You guys know what's up then. Okay, so how many people have built for iOS? A few. How many people have built for Android? A lot more. BlackBerry? Nobody. Oh no, there's a couple. Wait, you, yeah? All right, awesome. Are you guys Canadian too? Cool, you are. Anyone building for Windows Phone? Oh, actually, that's surprising, quite a few. Okay, sweet, good distribution. How about for the web? Who's building for the web? Yeah, that's the right way to do it, man. Okay, so PhoneGap is this thing I work on at Adobe. I used to work for a really small software company called Nitobi. And in 2007, Apple released the iPhone, and everybody in our company screamed like little girls, and we drove down to Seattle from Vancouver to buy them because they weren't selling them in Canada. And we were really stoked because Steve Jobs said, if you're going to build applications for the iPhone, you're going to build it with web technology. And we thought that was awesome. We thought that would be the right way to do things. And then a year later, he's like, no, psych, I'm kidding. You're actually going to build it using Objective-C, and if you want to get your apps onto this phone, you're going to have to go through our app store. And we didn't really like that. So we built this thing that lets you build your apps using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but we didn't solve the app store part, at least not yet. So PhoneGap isn't just for building apps using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for iPhones. We target all the mobile operating systems. And so as of today, we're on iOS, Android, BlackBerry, Windows Phone 7, Windows Phone 8, Windows 8, Windows 7, Qt, Bada, Firefox OS, Tizen, and I'm probably missing some, but it doesn't matter. So PhoneGap APIs, when you're building for a PhoneGap-based application, you're not just building a normal web application, you're building an application that can access what we call device APIs. They're APIs that are on the system. And I'll get into what those are all about a little bit later. Something else about PhoneGap, when we initially built it, it was free software. We built it and licensed it as MIT. The project has grown a lot over the years, and it finally came to a point where we donated the source code to the Apache Software Foundation under the name Apache Cordova. Cordova is the street I used to live on and where the Nitobi office is. It's not a place in Spain. So PhoneGap's got a really large community. There's a lot of people building for mobile these days. It probably doesn't surprise you, and a lot of them want to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to build their applications. We don't know how many users we have because it's free software and people just download it and use it. They don't have to tell us if they're using it, but we know we get downloaded roughly 300,000 times a month. So that lends to me to believe that we might have that many users. In total, we've been downloaded something like 2.5 million times, so it's a lot of developers. But PhoneGap's not just individuals, but it's also a lot of companies. So, sorry if it's like echoing. I'll try and stand over here. So it's just a lot of different organizations that are contributing to it. Adobe bought our company Nitobi a year and a half ago. There's about 24 developers working on PhoneGap. BlackBerry has about 12 developers contributing to PhoneGap. Google has 6, Microsoft has 2, IBM has 8, and Intel has 2 or 3. So there's a ton of people working on this full time, which is a great sign of its health. Another kind of aspect of PhoneGap is that we have like a really strong release cadence, and so we ship software every month, and we kind of do it in a different way. Most software projects start off with a list of features and then a hard date for a deadline, and our team decided that software is always a work in progress, and if we try and fit features into a particular date, more often than not those features will end up being done poorly or not well. So we work on features indiscriminate of date, and we just pick a date at the end of every month, and we ship whatever's ready at that point, whatever's high quality. And we do that because we need to stay ahead of what all these app stores and all these SDKs are doing. So we're shipping, whenever there's a bug, we know it's going to be fixed within a time frame that's acceptable. So I'm just going to quickly jump over to my terminal. And you probably can't read that, but maybe you can. Can you guys see that up there? Okay, cool. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Who here is a JavaScript developer? Okay. There's quite a few of you. I was going to tell some JavaScript jokes while I was at it, just because it's kind of fun. So true is true. That's obvious. So we can use the not operator to coerce something to the opposite of what it is. So we can say not true is false. That makes sense. And then we can go all the way back to true. And this is useful because we can find out if something's truthy. So I could do this with the grouping operator, and I could see if is 1 truthy. Yeah, it is. What about 0? Okay, 0 is falsy. That makes sense, right? So turns out true can also be coerced. And you can use the plus operator to turn true into a number, which means true plus true is equal to 2, which is kind of funny. Anyway, so let me get back to PhoneGap. If you want to do funny JavaScript stuff later, we can do that. So I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to create an application using Cordova. There isn't a PhoneGap CLI just yet. We're working on that. So this is like brand new stuff. Like you're looking at something that barely anyone has seen. So the Cordova command line tool has a incantation called create. I can say create my rad app. And if I go into my rad app, I can go Cordova add platform iOS. Whoops. Hold on, platform add iOS. I got a bit of a hangover, don't mind me. So if I look at this, under my platforms, I've got iOS, and then I've got this www folder. We're an Apache project, so we like www folders. If I look inside that www folder, holy shit, I got this big mess of markup. So that's pretty basic stuff. That's just HTML. There's no magic going on here. So if I jump back into my shell, I can go Cordova build and Cordova emulate. And this will take a few seconds, but what we're doing right now is we're compiling an iOS project with a web view. And then we're going to load up that HTML content that we created. Oh, please don't read my email. And that's what we just did. So this is that app that we just built using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's the same thing for Android, iOS, BlackBerry, Windows Phone, same commands and everything. So that was pretty easy. Let's get back to the presentation. So we release every month, and the big reason we do this is because a release is just a number, and that number is really just for issue tracking, and features are a completely different thing. And we want really good features, and we want features that are solid and high quality and perform well. We don't want features that are half-baked and fuck up a release. So we release all the time. The big question people have these days is, did the web solve cross-platform? And I think it did, in general, solve cross-platform. When it comes to things like operating systems and SDKs, the web's a pretty good deployment target. It works pretty well on all these different screen sizes. It's a great way to build applications. But the web didn't solve everything. The web definitely didn't solve things like accessing your device APIs. It also doesn't solve things like App Store distribution. And proprietary platforms with curated distribution isn't quite right either. These app stores are essentially methods of censorship, so we don't love it, but we got to live with it. Our ultimate goal with PhoneGap is to not have to actually be around. And this sounds crazy, but this is a necessary stepping stone. We want to see the web browser be the thing that we're building to. We don't want Apple to tell us what we're allowed to run on our phone. So what PhoneGap is really is it's an example. It allows you to build applications and target these app stores today using web technology, and it shows that the web can be a first-class platform. We're an implementation and a demonstration of technologies that could be adopted by standards bodies, ratified into the browser, and we get to go away. We've had this happen already. Early on, PhoneGap was one of the first browsers to implement the geolocation spec. And later on, geolocation landed in WebKit and then landed in most of these browsers. And we thought that was pretty awesome because every application built with that early version of PhoneGap would now run in the web browser and you wouldn't need PhoneGap at all. And that's what we're going for. So, sorry if I'm talking really fast. So there's this thing going on lately, and I don't know if you've noticed it, but there's a trend towards web operating systems. And I'm not sure what it means. We've got Chrome OS, Windows 8, you can build applications using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Firefox OS, which is Gecko on a Linux kernel. There's Tizen, which is essentially WebKit on a Linux kernel. And then there's OpenWebOS, which was at HP, but I think is now at LG. And it's WebKit on a kernel. So think about that. Google, Microsoft, Mozilla, Samsung, Intel, HP, and LG are all betting on packaged web applications for the future of operating systems. It's a pretty powerful thing. And using PhoneGap, you can get to these places today, and specifically you can get to the mobile app stores today using these techniques. Something else that's kind of neat just to note, all of these app stores are actually hybrid apps themselves. When you look at the Apple App Store, you're actually looking at an embedded web view, which is interesting and kind of meta. So you'll have to forgive me if you heard this one before from an Adobe person. We've done things like Flash and Air and whatever else in the past, but this is a completely different story. This is all open source. The idea here is that the ecosystem will grow, and Adobe wants to do this because apps are incompatible by design. When you build an application right now for a particular operating system, it's not going to run on another operating system. You can't reuse your skills as a web developer. You have to learn all these new skills. You have to pay for SDKs, and you have to pay for the right to publish to your own device. And that's wrong. So what we're talking about here are called packaged web applications. There are now some standards being worked on at the W3C to ratify these ideas. The one group that we're tracking most closely is called the System Application Working Group, System Apps or SysApps. And packaged web applications have a few characteristics that I'm going to talk about that are common across the board. So, you know, this is a little bit boring, but every packaged application today has a manifest file. And that manifest file will say things like your app title, your license, the icons, where the splash screens are, that type of stuff. The application manifest also gives you some other interesting superpowers though. It allows you to define what APIs are going to be accessed and used inside of that app. So you could declare, hey, my app needs access to the file system. This is a capability that the web hasn't had before. The web's sort of feature before was a sandbox, and this is a great feature. It's good, but it also means that your applications that are written for the web are substandard on the device they're running on. And so using this manifest idea, we're going to be able to set up a permissioning model. And that permissioning model will extend into the runtime. So in the case of PhoneGap, we're actually running on the file protocol, which means file : //, which means that we don't have any cross-origin request problems. Windowing runs a little differently in a runtime context. For example, if you do window.open in a packaged application, what happens? In the case of PhoneGap, we open up an embedded web view browser. So, for example, if you're building a Twitter application and you click on a tweet with a link, you don't want to boot the user out of your application into another app. You want to have it in onboard browser, at least in the case of iOS, because they don't have intents. There's also weird execution lifecycle events inside of a packaged application. So web apps are kind of ephemeral. They don't have state. They go away when you close the tab. But packaged apps are different. Packaged apps kind of know stuff about what's going on. When you go, when you're in an application, for example, on Android, and you move to another application, the original application goes into the background. And it'll fire things like pause and resume events, which is completely different behavior from what we saw in the past. It's also got like this sort of weird online-offline life cycle. So like these packaged applications are actually aware whether or not they're online or offline, which is really useful if you're, say, building an app that needs to back up itself. Another funny one is that packaged applications usually learn about the battery. And so there's a spec for this, and this will land in web browsers at some point. But we can check in a packaged app what the battery status is, which is really useful because if your phone's about to die and you say you have a document type of app, and you want to save your data. We implemented this in PhoneGap though, and we found out in most mobile devices, when you pull the battery, it drains the battery. And so that didn't work very well, and we don't know what to do about that yet. One other angle is the runtime security beyond the sandbox, and so we want to be able to do things like write and read files from a web browser, and we're just starting to see this capability come into browsers today. And then there's other things like network privacy and other boring junk. So these are device APIs, and we like to split device APIs up into two different buckets. One bucket we call sensors, the other bucket we call data. And these things are actually cross-platform, and I'm going to show you, and I'm going to pray that my network works here. It does. That's funny. It thinks I'm online. So these are the APIs that PhoneGap gives you today. And these are basically all the types of things that you can do with a phone. You get access to the accelerometer, we can access the camera, we can access the file system, geolocation. You get the idea. Oh. So sensors and data. Sensors are things like your GPS, your accelerometer, and data is things like your file system, your contacts, and your media. And that's all the stuff that we can do, and it's pretty cool, but we got to be really careful because this stuff is dangerous. You can imagine a website in the future, if you could turn on your front-facing camera, access all your contacts, and then email your friends the pictures of you while you're on your phone, that'd be bad. And so this is why we have to do all this boring security stuff up front. So people ask me, who's doing this stuff? Who's building PhoneGap-based applications? And I like to share some apps so people can see that you can build really, really good, high-quality apps today. This is my personal favorite thing that came out of PhoneGap. It's called Untapped. It's basically Foursquare for beer. And so you check in, I like beer, so you check into beer wherever you go, and you can earn badges for drinking more beer. It's like the ultimate game. And I'm really good at it. The worst badge I got this badge, and it's like, I don't know, it was like Weekday Warrior, and I drank 30 beers in 1 month, and I got it on like October 4th. It's embarrassing. Anyway, so the location-based applications tend to be popular for some reason with PhoneGap. This is another example of one that my friend Max built. It's called Gather. It allows you to find your friends and set up events where you can meet each other. It's kind of cool. Wikipedia uses PhoneGap to hit all the platforms, and so if you've ever used Wikipedia's mobile applications, all they did was repurpose their web app and then built that using PhoneGap, which is kind of a great story for reuse. I like this screenshot. It's like, water has been saved. All right. I'm not sure what this app is, but it's really beautiful. Some student couponing app from somewhere in the world. These guys built it for Android and iOS at the same time. They shipped, and they got a lot of ratings, and people are happy about it, which is great. This beautiful app, you can find it on our website, is for World Heritage Sites. They built it for the tablet context. It turned out really great. And this is sort of a common theme. Things that are content rich and you're not focusing on the Chrome and you're focusing on what the app is doing tends to work really well with web technology. This one's called Health Tap, another great app that gets a lot of good reviews, and it's on most of the platforms. I think you get the idea. So how does all this junk work? Basically, we just create a big web browser. And there's nothing really all that special about it. We just have this web browser fill the whole screen. And then we create a little mini bridge between the web browser and the operating system so you can execute native code, which is, yes, dangerous. Woo. Lastly, we load index.html like I showed you before. And you can write anything you want in that index.html. It's up to you to choose how you build your app. So how do you build your app is the big question people have these days. And I'm not really here to tell you how to build your app. It's just web tech. The tooling choice is up to you. The library use is up to you. We don't dictate how people build their applications. We don't tell you what IDE to use. We don't tell you what libraries to use. It's web technology. If it works for the web, it'll work inside of a PhoneGap context. Sometimes people like to use things like Enyo or Sencha, where there's really opinionated frameworks, and they work really well. Other times people use really simple, lightweight frameworks like Backbone and Zepto. Neither's right or wrong. It's up to you. You choose how you want to build it. And it's really important to us that we don't tell you like how to build your apps. So one of the things that I kind of hated the most about doing all this mobile business is you have to use all these tools that these vendors dictate on you, and they're usually broken and shitty, frankly. So PhoneGap is this huge collection of projects. I think we're now upwards of 25 repos on the Apache Software Foundation, and you can use as little or as much as you want to. We don't tell you how to build your apps. And the nice thing about doing this hybrid stuff is that you get to combine the strengths and the weaknesses of the platforms you're on. And so if I quickly hop back over to my terminal, remember how we built this app over here? Let's take a look at that app again. So that app was just this HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And if I look in this folder, www, that's all that you have to write if you're using our command line tooling. But if I look into the platforms, you'll see that there's also an Xcode project. And so were I so inclined, you can launch it inside of Xcode, and you can manipulate the project just like it were a regular iOS application. I kind of like to joke about Xcode. It's basically exactly like Eclipse, except for it looks like iTunes. Oh, fuck, it's going to try and update something. No. It's like there's no option to tell it to go away. It's just like, yeah, remind me later, because I really wanted to run you. Get out of here. Anyway, so you can do that if you want to. The point of that is that we're not locking you out of these environments. We don't abstract away the tooling and then create a leaky abstraction. When Apple updates, you get to update. You don't have to worry about things getting messed up. So I showed you our CLI tooling. We built this because we found developers were moving from, say, Android to iOS to BlackBerry, and all these different platforms have different command line tools, and developers would get confused because they wouldn't remember what to do. In the case of Android and BlackBerry, you have to use Ant to do your compilation. In the case of iOS, you have to use something called Xcode build, and no one would remember. But the thing is, all these things are doing common things. You're either building an application, attaching loggers, doing release builds, that kind of stuff. And so we created the CLI tooling so that all the nomenclature was the same, and a developer working on a PhoneGap-based application could move from different platforms without having to learn a whole new set of commands. We also have this thing called Winery, which we joke and call it Wiener, which is really mature. I don't think I have time to show it to you, but it stands for Web Inspector Remote. It allows you to attach a remote inspector instance back to a mobile app. And so if you were building something for, say, iOS, and you need to inspect it using Chrome DevTools, Winery lets you do that. Afterwards, because we probably don't have time, if you're really interested in this stuff and you want to see how to debug on a device remotely, just let me know and I'll show you Winery. There's another tool called Ripple, which I do have time to show you. So this is my website. You can tell I'm a really good designer. And why is that funny? I'm going to run Ripple. Whenever I make fun of my design skills, people laugh. And the other time people laugh is when I tell them I'm Canadian. And I've never been able to figure out why. I'll be like, I'm Canadian. They'll be like, ha ha ha. What's up with that? All right, so Ripple's an emulator, and it lets you pretend that you're running in a particular Cordova instance, but within your web browser. And this is kind of nice because you don't have to load up a whole bunch of crazy-ass SDKs to start doing development. All you need is Chrome. And so that's a part of the PhoneGap family of tools, as it were, and I love it. Oh, what could I have possibly done there? Oh, no. Ripple just took over my presentation. Stop you. All right. So this is kind of neat. When we started building PhoneGap, we have to test a lot, and we built an infrastructure up called Medic so that we could do continuous integration. And then just to be even crazier, we built this giant wall and we stuck a whole bunch of phones on it. And so every time PhoneGap developer does a commit back to the Cordova repos, we take that code down, we compile it with a test application, we launch it on all the phones simultaneously, and that test application runs a set of Jasmine unit tests, which posts the results back to a CouchDB instance, and we can see if we broke the world. And so if I go to ci.cordova.io, load. Oh, it's super slow. There we go. Oh shit. Android's not doing so well. So what's cool about this is as we're hitting commits, we don't have to test on each individual device. There's like 1 billion Android devices out there, and it's a real pain in the ass. So all of this stuff is open source, and if you're building an application, you could use our continuous integration system if you wanted to. So then there's some advanced techniques using PhoneGap. You can embed a PhoneGap instance inside of a native application, which is kind of like Inception. I know it's crazy, but so sometimes people are building apps and they only want to do a little bit of web content, or they want to have some native Chrome around it, and that's perfectly fine. PhoneGap's designed for that. It's called Cordova View. Another thing that you can do is extend PhoneGap with your own plugins. So this is new functionality that we're rolling out for 3.0, but it's available today. The idea, in fact, there's hundreds of plugins already. The idea is if PhoneGap doesn't do something for you and you want to access something that the native platform does, you can write a plugin and make that available to the web view, which is kind of awesome. And in fact, if you go to github.com/PhoneGap/PhoneGap plugins, and you're patient, you can see we have all these platforms. Let's go to iOS. There's just, I don't know, there's hundreds of plugins for everything. And it kind of makes sense because there's some stuff that just wouldn't make sense to be on Android, like say in-app purchases or whatever. And so if there's something that the default PhoneGap SDK doesn't do, it's really trivially easy to add that capability to the web view yourself. Obviously, shit can be broken. So mobile browsers are not all alike. In the case of PhoneGap, we work with whatever onboard browser is on that device, and we do that very explicitly because we want your code to be portable back to the open web. This means that we also have all the bugs that the browsers have, which there tends to be a lot of, and there's a lot of different WebKits that are out there. So a WebKit on Android 2.3 is nothing like the WebKit you find on mobile Safari in iOS. And yeah, that's web development. And we're just bringing that capability to you inside of PhoneGap. There's another kind of angle of this that's really hard. Is if you're building a PhoneGap app, you still have to have the Android SDK if you want to build for Android. We're not going to fix that problem. That's almost impossible for us to do. Likewise, if you want to build for iOS, you have to have the iOS SDK. But we created a hack, and it's called PhoneGap Build, and it's a hosted service, and it's free for open source projects. And it lets you build applications using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript without having any SDKs on your machine. And so I'm going to sign in. This is PhoneGap Build, and this is an application that's funny. This is an application that I built a while ago. All you have to do is upload HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to us in a zip file, or give us a Git repo, and we'll do the compilation for you. And you can just download it and do whatever you want. It's kind of cool. So there's a near-term roadmap. I'm going to tell you guys about a few things that are coming down the pipe. So right now, the PhoneGap build is completely discrete from PhoneGap itself. And so if you're building for iOS, you have to be on a Mac. And if you're building for Windows Phone, you have to be on a Windows machine. In PhoneGap 3.0, you can just be on any machine you want, and we'll fall back to PhoneGap Build and build for the platforms that you can't on your local machine. So whatever you do, whenever you run a build, you'll have builds for all the different platforms. This will obviously only be with the free stuff. There's work underway right now at Adobe to get Chromium running all the way back to Android 2.3. One of the biggest problems with Android 2.3 is the browser sucks and Chrome's awesome. And so we're fixing that. We're hoping to ship this around the 3.0 timeframe, but no promises. It's open source. And another thing we're working on is a new CSS library. So a lot of people go and build a PhoneGap-based application, and they struggle with getting the CSS to perform really good. And it's a bit of a dark art. It's hard. Web development isn't easy. And so Adobe's recognized this, and they've started working with us to build a new CSS library in the spirit of something like Twitter Bootstrap, but designed for mobile. We need your help. It's an open source project. And we can't do this without the volunteers that help us. So if you're interested in contributing back to open source, you should join us at Apache Cordova. You can find out more by going to cordova.io. And that's all I got for you. I think we got a few minutes for questions. I think.
Fantastic. Also, are there any questions for Mr. Leroux? Yes.
Okay. If I want to build an application that involves streaming media from the phone to a server and back to another phone, I should use this or go for a native application?
Streaming what? Exactly?
Your own recorded video streaming to another device.
It's going to be a pain in the ass no matter how you do it, man. So, yeah, you can capture video data. So we have a thing called Media Capture API. We don't have a streaming API for it just yet. There is a project called WebRTC out there that we have been looking at incorporating. I don't think that there's an easy way to do this on any platform yet today. You'd have to build this custom, and you'd have to write your own native code. If you wanted to get like a quick UI, PhoneGap might be good for that, but you'd have to write native code for the plugin part of this.
Okay, so uploading is easy, but streaming it back to another device is...
Well, we can record and you can upload and do file transfers.
But live also, so...
But actual streaming isn't there, no.
Okay.
Not streaming bytes, not yet. That is something that we are roadmapped to do some point in the future.
6 months?
Oh shit, dude, I'm not making any promises. They're filming me.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Are there any more questions? Okay, over here.
I have a question about performance.
Yeah.
What are the performance issues with PhoneGap? Is it possible to make like a smooth running canvas game with PhoneGap?
It is, yeah. You'd have to use request animation frame, and you got to be careful about like how you manage all the data or state that you're going to deal with. But people do build pretty fast apps, smooth apps, usually 2D, not 3D type of things with Canvas. If you go to phonegap.com/apps, you can see a whole bunch of examples. There's one called Orbium that we helped those guys do a couple of years back, and it's totally fine. The trick is request animation frame if you're building these apps. Ironically, Windows Phone 8 has the best performing Canvas, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, no one ever expects that, right? It's like Windows is the fastest. It actually is. Yeah, totally doable.
Thanks.
You mentioned BlackBerry development. Here.
Where are you? Oh, okay.
Why would somebody develop via PhoneGap having access to WebWorks? What are the advantages on PhoneGap over the WebWorks?
Well, okay, yeah, actually WebWorks is pretty awesome. They tailored that project after a lot of the stuff that we did at PhoneGap, and we work really closely with BlackBerry on this stuff. The WebWorks SDK is essentially like PhoneGap, except for we have a slightly different API. So the only reason you would use PhoneGap would be if you wanted to get portability to the other platforms. But if you're only interested in BB10, then whatever, I would use WebWorks. It's cool.
Yes, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, over here.
Hi, so you mentioned you don't like the App Store and Android market and all those app stores, and you didn't mention, do you have any plans for how to do that or how to solve that?
Well, no, I mean, our plan right now is to give people the capability to ship to those stores using web tech so they have a way off of them more than anything. I don't really agree with the premise that anyone can tell me what I'm allowed to install on my device. I'm sure Mr. Stallman will have even stronger thoughts on that after me. You know, you've got a bunch of choices. One of your choices is to just not support them. Another choice is if you feel like you have to, you know, you have clients, you got to pay the bills, you got to do this work, you need to access that market, whatever, PhoneGap is an option. At least it can get you out of there. I have a lot of kind of confidence in the new things that are happening with like Firefox OS and Ubuntu phones, so I don't think it's going to be this way forever. I hope not anyways.
Is it possible to use PhoneGap developed for Playbook, iPad, or Android tablets?
All of them, yes.
And what about developing for Playbook? Is it something like developing for Android and then porting application to Playbook, or just some native browser designed especially for Playbook?
No, it uses the onboard WebKit instance. Playbook has kind of an awkward, I believe, BlackBerry 7 operating system, which is a slightly older WebKit, but they are upgrading them to BB10 in the next year or so, they say. But I didn't think anyone actually bought Playbook, so I don't know if it's even a problem, but I'm just kidding. I have Playbook, they're cool. Yeah, it's just a big web view in that case, right? And so like if you build PhoneGap for iOS and it runs inside of an iPad, it just means that your web browser gets bigger and you have to use responsive techniques to deal with that. Media queries work, so I mean, a lot of people will build responsive style PhoneGap apps to hit the tablet form factor, and the code will be no different across these platforms. Well, there'll be differences, but it won't be crazy differences.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions for Brian? No? Okay. One more.
Oh,
This will be the last one.
there's one other guy over here, but you can always ask me later too, dude.
Sorry. Hello. I wonder how is it about the performance, because if I see a platform for each and every different or you know PhoneGap available for each and every different platform, then I wonder how fast it works after reworking your code.
I mean, so performance is always hard, right? And this is one thing I try and stress to people, that just because you're writing native code doesn't mean your code will be good. Like, you still have to write good performant code. Same with the web. It's just, the web is definitely slower, so there's more abstractions in between you and the metal. You have to use all the right web techniques. The same ones that apply to the browser apply to a PhoneGap instance. So you have to minify your JavaScript. You have to use CSS transforms if you want to get GPU acceleration. You have to use all the web dev tricks. If you really need to squeeze every little bit of performance out, then yeah, write it in C.
Thank you.
Yeah.